I didn't disappear because I didn't care. I disappeared because I was drowning. And I don't want anyone else to ever see me like that. It's something I try to hide and keep away from the world. But the truth is, hiding doesn't fix anything. Hey, it's me. If you're new here, welcome. If you've been here for a while, you probably noticed I disappeared for a bit. And if you found me through someone else talking about me, you're welcome here too. You don't have to take anyone else's word for who I am. You can listen for yourself. This is The Void and the Flame. I'm Rachel or Ray, and this space is where I talk about the things most people avoid. Things like patterns and emotional loops, the ways we disconnect from ourselves and then wonder why we keep ending up in the same places. And most of all, accountability in our own chaos and bullshit. I don't come here as someone who has everything figured out. I come here as someone who is actively in it, learning, failing, rebuilding, trying again, and sharing what I'm seeing along the way. Because I believe that understanding ourselves changes everything. And I think a lot of us are walking around inside patterns we don't even realize are running our lives. The truth is, I've been spiraling. Not dramatically, not all at once, quietly, slowly. The kind of spiral where you don't even realize how far under you are until you finally stop moving or thinking long enough to look around. And it didn't happen in a vacuum. It never does it? Life stacked up, financial pressure, my car breaking down within weeks of purchasing it, trying to survive while also trying to grow, trying to improve at work while my nervous system felt like it was constantly under pressure, trying to build meaningful things while feeling completely unstable internally. And eventually it all caught up to me. I shut down. I got overwhelmed. I started avoiding things that I cared deeply about, and I started sabotaging things that I had worked really hard to build. And I think part of what pushed me even deeper into the spiral was realizing how much all of this actually mattered to me. The podcast, the book, the multiverse, the things I was trying so hard to create with intention and meaning. I had been working on an episode that carried a lot of emotional weight for me personally. And somewhere along the line, I think the pressure of wanting to do it justice completely just overwhelmed me. Because once something becomes deeply meaningful, failure stops feeling abstract. It becomes really personal. And instead of slowing down and working through that honestly, I shut down. I disappeared. I avoided the things that mattered most to me because suddenly they mattered too much. And honestly, that realization still kind of blows my mind a little bit because I don't think I fully understood how serious the shutdown had become until I looked around one day and realized I had stopped doing almost everything that made me feel alive. I don't know if you caught in that last part where I had mentioned a book. Yeah, I wrote a book. I wrote a whole freaking book. And then almost completely disappeared from the things I loved in a matter of days. The podcast stopped, the momentum stopped, the creativity stopped, I stopped. Full stop. And my cat's probably going to claw to get out in a second. See? 1 minute. Okay, I'm back. As I was saying before I was so cutely interrupted, the next thing I knew, almost 3 months had passed. The book still sat unfinished. It still does. Still does. We're getting there, though. Anyways, it's not published. And, there I was trying to claw my way back out again, while my brain was actively trying to convince me to just give up and go back to the life that I've always known. Because that's the thing about patterns. Even painful ones become familiar. And I don't think that we fully realize sometimes the level of destruction that we participate inside our own lives. Not because everything is our fault, but because when overwhelm, fear, shame, exhaustion, trauma, avoidance, and survival patterns all collide together, we can unknowingly become active participants in our own stagnation. And I think that's what I've been watching happen everywhere lately. Not only just in my own life and existence, but online, in relationships, in people. Everything becomes someone else's fault, someone else's responsibility, someone else's problem. And while yes, people absolutely hurt each other, there also comes a point where we have to ask ourselves, where am I keeping myself stuck to? Because accountability isn't punishment, it's power. A deeper truth is, the spiral didn't just start 3 months ago. It's been building for a while now. The last year and a half, maybe 2, has felt like trying to stay grounded while everything around me just kept shifting. Like I was constantly trying to find my footing while life just kept moving underneath me. And that time really changed me. Over this time, I really started finding my own voice, even when it still shakes and even when it cuts out, even when I'm still scared. I've said things that I used to swallow, and I finally am getting to a place where I don't immediately question myself after. And the deeper I started looking at my own spiral, the more I realized that this wasn't just about stress or money or my car or work or one bad situation after another. It was about patterns. Patterns I had been repeating for years without fully realizing it. Because when I really stopped long enough to look honestly, I noticed something. Different people, different situations, different environments, but somehow the same emotional feeling kept showing up. The same exhaustion, the same overgiving, the same silence, the same internal war between this doesn't feel right and just keep the peace. And I think what really hit me was this. At some point, I had to stop only asking, why are these people like this? And start asking, why do I keep ending up here? Because this wasn't just one person. It wasn't just one situation. It was a pattern, different faces, same feeling. And I think part of why all of this hit me so hard is because so much changed in such a short amount of time. I lost a job I never imagined losing. I went through a relationship that forced me to confront dynamics I had spent years trying to minimize or explain away. I finally walked away from a friendship that had existed for almost 2 decades. And in doing so, had to come face to face with the reality that some things I kept calling normal were never actually healthy to begin with. And underneath all of that, I am still trying to survive inside an environment that no longer feels emotionally safe for me and for my kids. Trying to hold everything together while quietly realizing more and more each day that I really need my life to change. Not eventually, not someday, actually change. And that's the uncomfortable part about patterns. Eventually, you stop only looking at the people around you and you start looking at the role that you've been playing inside those dynamics too. And this is the part I have to own, not because I caused everything around me, but because I can finally see where I abandoned myself inside of it. There were moments where I could have spoken up, moments where I could have said, this isn't okay, moments where I could have protected myself, my peace, my kids, but I didn't. And not because I was weak, but because I was surviving, trying to keep the peace, trying to avoid fallout, trying to not make things worse. And what I didn't realize was every time I've stayed quiet to protect the situation, I was continuing to disconnect from myself. And the wild part is, a lot of this happened even while I knew better, even while I was becoming more aware, even while I could clearly see other people's patterns and even my own. Because awareness alone doesn't automatically stop the cycle. Sometimes you still trip, sometimes you still spiral, sometimes you still fall back into familiar survival responses. Even when part of you is screaming, you already know where this leads. And I think that's important to say out loud because healing isn't this clean, graceful, perfectly enlightened process people sometimes try to make it look like. Sometimes healing looks like seeing the pattern, falling into it anyways, and choosing to pull yourself back out faster than you used to. There's a quote that I've always loved, or at least this is my version of it. It's okay to have a breakdown. It is not, however, okay to unpack and stay there. And I think that's where I've been lately. Not unpacking permanently, but realizing I had started setting up furniture in places that I was never meant to live in emotionally. And now I'm trying to clean it back up again. And I can hear maybe some people might be saying, like, you're 42. Why did it take you this long? You know, you're a mom. Why would you allow anything? And I get it. It's easy to say what you would do when you're not the one inside the situation, because when your nervous system has been shaped a certain way, when conflict has repeatedly come with consequences, when speaking up hasn't always felt safe, it's not always as simple as just say something. Sometimes you freeze, sometimes you stay quiet. Sometimes you survive the only way that you know how. And survival doesn't always look strong from the outside, but it is. I spent most of my life calling myself a peacekeeper, a people pleaser, the bigger person. But if I'm being completely honest, a lot of that was just fear. Fear of confrontation, fear of disappointing people, fear of someone being angry with me, fear of creating waves, or fear of making things worse. So I became the person who stayed quiet, the person who adapted, that person that just tried to smooth everything over before it could explode. And people absolutely benefited from that version of me for a very long time, because when you're the quiet one, the accommodating one, the one who keeps giving people the benefit of the doubt, people start assuming that you'll continue tolerating things you never should have in the first place. And somewhere along the line, I learned that it felt safer to silence myself than risk what might happen if I fully spoke. When you deal with a lot of volatile personalities, sometimes silence is your best option. And I think that's why some of the waves in my life feel louder now. Because when people benefit from your silence, your growth feels like betrayal to them. The version of me that stayed quiet or overexplained, absorbed everything, and tolerated things that hurt is not coming back. And when people realize they can no longer access that version of you, sometimes they react. Sometimes they get louder, more petty, more provoking, because they're trying to pull you back into a dynamic that no longer works. But I'm starting to understand something really clearly, because the peacekeeper doesn't prevent war. It just delays it. And when I look back now, there are moments that seemed small at the time, but say everything now. Moments that felt off, but I explained them away. Moments where something simple became distorted into something else entirely, where responsibility wasn't taken, it was redirected, where explanations didn't quite match reality, but unfortunately, I accepted them anyways. Peacekeeper. And when children are involved in those dynamics, it really hits differently, because children should never carry the weight of adult perception or become part of emotional dynamics they never asked to be inside of. And once you start noticing those kind of patterns, you can't really unsee them. And that's really hard to sit with. Not just what happened, but realizing that I didn't fully trust myself enough to question what I was actually feeling at the time. Because familiarity will keep you trapped for a very long time, even painful familiarity, even unhealthy familiarity. Because familiar pain still feels safer to the nervous system than unfamiliar change. That's why so many people struggle with change. And this path, it's lonely. I know people say that all the time, but you don't really understand it until your relationships start changing with you. Because I've realized something recently that's been really hard to sit with. Like some of my relationships were built around a version of me that overgave constantly. The fixer, the helper, the emotional support system, the person people came to, the person who would carry everyone else's weight, even while quietly I was collapsing under the weight of my own. And for a long time, being needed felt like love to me. Being useful felt like connection, and being depended on gave me purpose. So now that I'm stepping out of that role, those roles, some relationships feel different, uneven, confusing, And not because the people are bad, not because they don't care, but because the dynamic itself was built around me abandoning myself quietly to maintain it. And that's been a really painful thing to have to realize and own, because there are people I love deeply. People I know genuinely love me too, but I'm realizing I can't keep showing up in ways that completely drain me, especially when I'm barely holding myself together as it is. And there's a lot of guilt in that. A lot of guilt, because when you've spent your whole life being the person everybody leans on, suddenly needing support yourself feels incredibly uncomfortable and sometimes even shameful. And I've caught myself getting resentful in moments like that and other moments, not because someone intentionally hurt me, but because I started realizing how emotionally alone I actually felt inside certain relationships. And that's hard to admit out loud, because some people love you the best way that they know how, and it still may not be what you actually need anymore. And I think that's part of growing too, realizing love alone doesn't automatically create emotional compatibility or reciprocity or depth. And then I've caught myself swinging too far in the other direction too, pulling away, avoiding, shutting down, convincing myself I don't need anyone at all, which is definitely not true, because I don't fully know yet how to maintain connections without disappearing inside other people's needs. It is something that I am still learning a little more every day. And when you are a nurturing, caring person, you want to give to people, you want to overgive. So pulling back is a very different experience all in itself. And I'm still learning the difference between being caring and self-abandonment, between supporting people and emotionally carrying them, or connection and overfunctioning. And honestly, that's probably one of the hardest parts of this whole process, learning how to stay connected without losing myself inside the relationship. And I want to also be honest about something else. There's a part of me that's been showing up lately that I don't love. Yeah, no. Yeah, that part I mentioned earlier, that's mean. She's sharp. She's reactive. She's not very nice sometimes. And I've heard her come out recently, especially with the people that I feel safest with, and it doesn't really feel good. Granted, I'm not directing this mean girl at anyone. I am letting her blow off steam in a safe space where it's not going to hurt anybody. But I understand where she came from. She's the part of me that got tired of staying quiet. The part that finally learned how to fight back after years of silence. But when you go from silence to finally having a voice, it doesn't always come out clean at first. Sometimes it comes out sideways, sometimes sharp, sometimes in moments where it definitely doesn't belong. And that's where my responsibility is now, learning how to listen to that part of myself without letting her control everything. Because if I don't, the same energy that I've been trying to get away from, I become it. And I don't want that. I think part of why I'm so aware of all of this now is because of what I've been seeing everywhere. I mentioned it a little bit briefly, online, in conversations, in the world in general, everything feels very loud, reactive, chaotic, people exposing each other, dragging each other, projecting pain everywhere, immediate reactions without pause, without a second thought. And, sometimes I understand the urge, like I really do, to react, to defend yourself, to be heard, to prove your side. But I've made a conscious decision that I don't want to present myself from that place ever. It's not who I am. It's not really who I've ever been. Would it be easy to fall into that? Yeah, because, that doesn't mean I don't feel anger or hurt or frustration. I absolutely do. But, I choose that when I speak publicly, I want it to come from somewhere grounded, intentional, clear, clean. I want to build, not destroy. Because not everything that triggers us is meant to be projected outwards. Sometimes it's a mirror. And I've had to learn that the hard way, plenty of times. The things that trigger us most usually point towards something unresolved in ourselves. And that's really uncomfortable work, but it's real work. And I think it's very easy right now to look around and say, they're the problem. This is the problem. Everything outside of me is the issue. But it takes a completely different level of awareness to ask, where am I contributing to my own suffering? Where am I still repeating something that I haven't fully healed yet? Where am I being completely delusional and pushing away accountability? Because it do be like that sometimes, let's be real. And that's where actual change can start. Because something else that I've learned on this journey is that growth requires flexibility. And honestly, I think that's a pretty hard thing for human beings. We get attached to our perspectives, our pain, our stories, our identities, the way that we think things happened, or the way we think people are, or the way we think we are. And sometimes we grip onto those things so tightly because changing our perspective feels kind of like losing a piece of ourselves. But I've definitely realized lately that real growth requires the willingness to loosen your grip sometimes. To pause long enough to ask, what if I don't fully understand this yet? What if there's more here that I still can't see? Because I'm not always going to get everything right. Like, I'll be the first person to own up when I make a mistake. There are going to be moments where I believe something fully and later realize I didn't have all the information, or I might have misunderstood something, or maybe I reacted from pain instead of clarity, or maybe I simply just couldn't see clearly yet. And weirdly enough, I'm becoming more okay with admitting that. Not less, because I care more about truth than I care about protecting my ego. And I think that's something that we're losing a little bit right now as people, the ability to evolve publicly, the ability to say, you know what? I was wrong. I learned something. I see this differently now. I didn't fully understand before. Because somewhere along the line, people started treating change like hypocrisy instead of evidence of growth. But changing your mind when presented with deeper awareness is not weakness. It's wisdom. And I think some of the loudest most reactive people are often the ones fighting the hardest to avoid looking at themselves honestly. Because if they stop reacting long enough to really look inward, they might have to confront something uncomfortable. And I get that too, because self-awareness can hurt, growth can hurt, ego death can hurt. But if we never allow ourselves to evolve, we just stay trapped inside outdated versions of ourselves, versions built from survival, fear, shame, conditioning, pain. I don't want to stay there anymore. There's a line that has been coming to mind a lot lately, and it goes something like, all the world is a stage, ... And the more I step back and observe, the more I realize how many people are just performing strength, happiness, certainty, healing, victimhood, confidence, morality. Trying to control perception, to manage image, to shape narratives before anyone else can. Trying to avoid being seen too clearly. And social media has amplified that in ways I don't think we fully understand yet. Because now people don't just live their lives, they brand them, they curate them, they edit them, they filter them, they package them, they turn them into identities. And somewhere inside of all of that noise, I think a lot of people are slowly losing touch with who they actually are underneath their performance. And the truth is, I've done it too. Maybe not in the same ways, but I've absolutely hidden behind versions of myself before. The overly understanding version, the spiritually evolved version, the calm version, the I'm fine version, the version that kept trying to hold everything together while quietly falling apart internally. Because masks aren't always malicious. Sometimes they're survival. Sometimes they're protection. Sometimes they're the only way we knew how to function at the time. But eventually, the mask gets exhausting. And I think that's part of what this whole season of my life has been. Watching masks fall, watching identities crack, watching illusions collapse. Not just in other people, but in myself too. And, instead of feeling like I have to respond to everything or anything, now I think I'm fully understanding that truth never needs to scream. Patterns reveal people eventually. Consistency reveals people eventually. Time tells all. And I would rather spend my energy becoming more honest than becoming more performative. But because at the end of the day, I don't want to build a life that only looks real from the outside. I want one that actually feels real when I'm alone with myself too. So, through all of this, I have made a decision. I'm not disappearing anymore. I'm not staying buried under all of this. I'm not going back to the version of myself that stays silent just to keep everyone else comfortable. I'm climbing back out, not perfectly, not all at once, but consciously. And I think part of that process has been realizing just how much noise I was living inside. Other people's opinions, other people's chaos, other people's projections, the constant pressure to react, to explain myself, defend myself, to prove who I am. And when you live inside that kind of noise long enough, you slowly lose the ability to hear yourself clearly. Sometimes for years, sometimes your entire life. But when you finally start stepping back from it, when you stop feeding every distraction, every emotional fire, every external demand pulling at your nervous system, something strange starts to happen. You can hear yourself again, maybe even for the first time. Your actual feelings, your intuition, your boundaries, your needs, your truth. Not the version shaped by fear or shaped by survival, and definitely not the version built around keeping everyone else comfortable. The real one, the real you. And that's what I'm finally trying to return to myself. I think that's what this whole podcast has been about. A slow, documented return to myself, showing anyone that it is possible, that we are all human and we all make mistakes, we all backslide, we all have breakdowns, but we don't have to ever unpack and live there. And if you're listening to this right now, feeling stuck, feeling overwhelmed, feeling like you're trying to grow while life keeps dragging you backwards, you're not broken. You're in a pattern. And the fact that you can start seeing the pattern means something is already changing. Because awareness is where the interruption begins. And interruption is where change begins. If you've watched any of the previous episodes, we talk about that a lot. This work isn't clean. It isn't linear. And it sure as hell isn't pretty most days. But, sometimes it looks like clarity. Sometimes it looks like grief. Sometimes it looks like finally admitting that you're exhausted. Sometimes it looks like falling apart and choosing to come back anyways. But it's real. And so am I. And I'm still here. And maybe that's the real work. Not becoming perfect, not becoming untouchable, and not becoming endlessly healed. Just becoming more honest, more conscious, more connected to yourself, little by little. So yeah, that's where I've been. Mentally unpacking boxes in rooms I probably shouldn't have moved into emotionally in the first place. It'd be like that. But I'm still here. I'm still creating. I'm still learning. I'm definitely still messing up. I am still trying. And honestly, that feels a lot more real than pretending I've got everything figured out all the time, or curating some perfect online version of me that doesn't even truly exist. So maybe this episode wasn't really a comeback. Maybe it was just a return to my voice, a return to myself, a return to the things that I almost convinced myself to abandon. And if you've been feeling lost lately too, maybe this is your reminder that you're allowed to return to yourself as well, as many times as you need to. I'll be back next week. Until then, be gentle with yourself. The world is loud enough already. And always remember, you don't have to keep the fire lit alone.